So let's have a look then. This is an interesting situation for the police, at the very least, in Portugal, in the capital, in Lisbon. CHEGA's Great Right-Wing World Summit. Look at this. There's a right-wing world summit happening in Portugal. A big headache for the police. Bolsonaro has been confirmed, as has Matteo Salvini. I think that's the Italian number 2, which I think his opponents call him. Invites have been sent to Trump and Le Pen as well to come to Portugal. The presence in Lisbon of various leaders of the world's extreme right promises to be a big headache for the PSP police, who will have to guarantee security for those taking part in the summit between May 13th and 14th. And from a free speech point of view, you've got to appreciate it, haven't you? And then there's the concerns that democracy is not inevitable. The next article I'll read is pointing to the uneasiness that would, of course, be around such a rally and the people it might attract. So says Correio da Manhã tabloid today. This was reported 4 days ago. Thank you, Natasha Don. Following up on a video statement recorded by Andre Ventura. It's a cool name, isn't it? Whatever you think of the guy, Andre Ventura is a bit of a sort of Hollywood name, leader of Portugal's right-wing party CHEGA. I won't play the video, but I'll tell you that according to his statement, the presence of Jair Bolsonaro, Matteo Salvini, and many other leaders of the European right places Lisbon as one of the strongest new centres of the right in Europe. He's saying that, I'm not sure that's true, is it? As one of the strongest new centres of the right in Europe and one of the world references in the fight against socialism, the fight against impoverishment, the fight against globalism, the fight against federalism, the fight against gender ideology, the fight against for the dignity of those who were, I think that's the fight against for the dignity of those who work for those who live at the cost of those who work. So some pretty strong themes there that are likely to trigger, hopefully stimulate the right sort of debate such that we can live together in peace. Weren't the left and the right wing the balances and checks on a sensible society once upon a time before we ended up with these terrible polarities? CM Correio da Manhã suggests that the Lisbon summit aims to emulate events put on by the ultra-conservative American movement championed by former President Donald Trump. Thus, my commentary here, thus ending up as just, ghettoized political events of no meaning, and a lot of heat and fury and very little political light, I would say. Mr. Trump has already been sent an invitation to the summit, as has France's right-wing icon Marine Le Pen. Confirmed for the event already are Bolsonaro, the Italian deputy prime minister, Italian number 2. Also Geert Wilders of Holland's Freedom Party, Tino Schupralia, president of Germany's alternative AfD party, and Santiago Abascal of Spain's Vox party. So you get the gist there, and it's a bit of a headache. They were thinking of putting it on at Campo Pequeno, but that might not be. It's an old bullfighting stadium, isn't it? Turned into a shopping centre, I believe, an auditorium. So that's where they were thinking of doing it, but it may be a problem from a point of view of security. That's going to be a very interesting event with perhaps the world's gaze on Portugal. For such an event that I wouldn't have seen coming, quite frankly, here in Portugal. I will share with you now, democracy is not inevitable. This is also very interesting from, I think, a bit of saber rattling, and I think I can use that well in this context, because we have the Admiral, who probably has a saber as part of his ceremonial attire. Here he is, and his quote, "Democracy not inevitable," says Defense Chief Gouvier Melo. I'm going to balance this by putting on our normal background. What's good about your morning? I'm sorry if I've upset it talking about politics this morning, but I think we can talk about politics without necessarily getting upset. It's a good test, isn't it, of a steady-headed person. If it fails, a new generation of autocrats will take reins of power at a time. This is the article, Natasha Don again, yesterday's Portugal Resident. At a time of heightened political dissatisfaction, and some would say deterioration, Portugal's Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Enrique Gouvier Melo, has warned that democracy is not inevitable and must be defended and nurtured. Speaking at a conference just up the road from here, from me in San Martino de Porto on Silver Coast, he was at Porto de Mos Leiria on the 10th, by the sound of it. And as part of a cycle of celebrations for the 50th anniversary of Portugal's own democracy, celebrated, of course, on April 25th, 25 de Abril, he described a world divided between autocracies and democracies. And I think this is part of the run-up to his possible election as president. If democracies fail to present convincing arguments about the importance of political freedoms, or if citizens become disillusioned with the way they are governed, that's your problem, I think, right there. A new generation of autocrats will be very willing to step in and take the reins of power, he warned. Students of history will see this, won't they? History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And I think he's hit the nail on the head there. It's very important to address this disillusionment, isn't it? The sort of thing Pete was talking about. Brexit, great example. If they succeed, the world will become more violent. That's the new generation of autocrats. And they're not all crazy right-wingers, are they? Other autocrats are available. And if they succeed, the world will become more violent, corrupt, and dangerous to live in, says Lusa. In the speech where he spoke about the end of the Cold War, Gouvier Mello pointed out that the destructuring of ideological systems of reference, some negative effects of globalization, and a disastrous set of international policies have revived dormant nationalisms and identity and religious extremisms fracturing international society. Interesting stuff, huh? Democratic governments may not be more wedded to peace than autocracies, but it is well established that democracies rarely go to war with each other, he said. Good point. Addressing the geopolitical and geostrategic framework, the resurgence of autocracies and the challenges of democracies, the Admiral described how the advance of autocratic regimes has generated concerns about the weakening of democratic institutions, the erosion of civil rights, and the threat to press freedom. In a reflection of the changing balance of financial power. Now, there's another thing. The spotlight is not too much on that, is it? The massive transfer globally of wealth from poor to rich. Autocracy, sorry, I'm adding a lot in here. Natasha Don didn't say that last bit. What she said was, in a reflection of the changing balance of financial power, autocracies are increasingly funding democracies. He went on, which is worrying with Western economies dependent on capital flows from the Chinese and Persian Gulf economies. Interesting. And it'll be also interesting to know where the funding's coming from for this so-called kind of right-wing convention. Who's paying for that, I wonder? What is their agenda? In the context of the challenges of international cooperation, the rivalry between democracies and autocracies presents significant challenges. As in an increasingly polarized world, collaboration on global issues has become more difficult, and nations are increasingly reluctant to work together in areas such as trade, security, and the environment. It's not that difficult, is it? But it does seem to be. The man who became a national hero during the COVID vaccination campaign. So I've got my man right there. He did spearhead the pandemic response. Described how the Russian invasion of Ukraine produced the greatest unity and urgency among democracies in the last 40 years. Western democracies have united around common values such as freedom of expression, the protection of human rights, and the defense of democratic rule. But not all so-called democratic countries are so good at that, are they? Anyway, by autocratic nations like Russia and China have positioned themselves as alternatives to the Western democratic model, offering their own revisionist vision of political and economic development. Portugal, as a nation state, small and limited in its relative power in the concert of nations, that's a nice turn of phrase, should take it into consideration in formulating its policies. The world is not and does not seem to be moving towards global peace, and no international legal system per se will fully protect Portuguese interests. Some say it is the most peaceful it's ever been, however, wanting to bring some balance to this. Portugal, and I'm not saying it's peaceful, but I'm saying it's some commentators suggest it is more peaceful than it's ever been. Portugal will not be free from being dragged, in the view of the coalitions it belongs to, the position and space it occupies geographically in its interest, to a more central and heated zone of conflict between the two blocs. He continued. Admiral Gouvier Mello is increasingly tipped as a successor to the. This is it, isn't it? This is why I think his personal agenda is exposed here. He's making these speeches and declarations, I think, as part of his presidency campaign. And President Marcelo will, of course, step down at the end of his second mandate in 2026. So the Admiral getting ready to be in that position and put himself in the public light. Back in November last year, a poll conducted for Expresso showed that the majority of Portuguese thought he would be a very good president. Since then, there has been the Mondego mutiny, in which his stance was seen as overly autocratic. Well, there's an irony there, isn't there? A military man talking about democracy, and then being seen or described as autocratic in his management of the Mondego mutiny. That was an interesting situation. But the fact that he is not a former politician could elevate him considerably in the public's eyes. Yes. So there you go. In his opinion, this is interesting. It's not the Admiral's opinion. Writing in Correio da Manhã today, Deputy Editorial Director General, that's quite a title, big business card. Eduardo Damaso runs through the issues damaging national politics today, suggesting they are not, in the end, the biggest problems for the country's leaders. In his opinion, the biggest problem is the growth of the right-wing party CHEGA and an admiral who could also end up in Belém. So he's not happy with CHEGA or the admiral. That would be Eduardo Damaso. I thought that was interesting. I wonder if you did